Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the Big Blue Banter podcast. Here with myself, Dan Schneier, and Nick Turchin. We are here to deliver you today the preview of the Giants-Jaguars game. Obviously, we don't have game tape from the 2018 season yet to work with, but we are very excited when we do get the chance to dive into it starting this next week for the Dallas Cowboys preview next week. But we do have a lot to work with anyway, based on what we saw from the 2017 season and based on what we saw from this preseason. So without any further ado, I'm going to send it over to Nick and see how he's doing today. I always ask him how he's doing. How are you doing today, Nick?
Doing good. A lot more psyched that it's week one. And like you said, there will be tape and there's a game tonight, which is tremendous. And
Yes.
get to watch an in-division foe and get some notes there. And it'll be really good. Really psyched to be here, man.
Yeah, it's really exciting to get the NFL season underway. I know if you're like me, and you probably are, if you're listening to a podcast like this one, which is pretty much very technical and in-depth for the most part, you're probably just been dying for this NFL season to get going again, waiting through August. It sucks because it's like your summer's passing away, but at the same time, you're looking forward to something so great that's coming, and that's the NFL. I can't wait. So we're going to dive right into it with a little bit of news and notes. It's Thursday. Olivier Vernon, Giants' top pass rusher, starting right outside linebacker, is not practicing again. We do know now, based on what Pat Shurmur finally revealed, that he's been very Bill Belichick-esque in his secrecy about these injuries. We do know he is dealing with a high ankle sprain. To what extent, we don't know. I will say this. We don't know the grade of that high ankle sprain. I doubt we're going to find that out. Giants have been keeping a lot of these injuries and just news in general under wraps on the new regime. And obviously after last year with the leak from the players in the locker room, talking about their dismay, and Jacina Anderson got a lot of those inside scoops. I think that they're going to kind of keep things under wraps. So we don't know the extent of it, but when you're not practicing on Thursday, it's highly unlikely you're playing on Sunday. So I wouldn't expect Vernon to play, even though Pat Shurmur, the head coach, didn't rule it out. And Vernon himself says he's feeling a lot better. When you look back at the 2017 season, Vernon first suffered the high ankle sprain. We don't know if it's the same ankle. Again, Shurmur won't give us any information, but he did suffer a high ankle sprain against the Bucs in Week 4 in that loss. Tried to rush back from it, re-aggravated it, and was really never the same in 2017. So I think it's smart play by the Giants to sit him out, and I'd keep sitting him out until this thing's all the way back. Obviously, it sucks. I mean, I think he's the most important player on this defense. I've said that before. I know Nick's going to get into a little bit why he thinks the Giants can still be fine from a pass rush standpoint against the Jaguars, at least, without him. But, at the same time, I'd rather have a fully healthy Vernon for the rest of the season and miss more games. Nick, did you have anything to add there? By the way, Tay Davis also injured, not playing. Obviously, a back-end special teams guy who they like as an inside linebacker long-term. Probably not factoring into 2018 plans. Lorenzo Carter was actually added to the injury report today on Thursday out of nowhere with an illness, but I don't think it's anything too serious, and he's expected to start in Vernon's place. So, Nick, what do you have to say about the Vernon injury?
I think, obviously it sucks to miss a guy like that, like you said, and he had a pretty good preseason, showed, at least the beginnings of showing production in Betcher's system. But I do like the depth at the OLB side of things.
Right.
So I don't think that it was the situation where they needed an excellent pass rusher to go against an excellent tackle consistently all game. Again, it's not to really belittle Jacksonville's tackles. They're kind of the better end of their offensive line. But it's not a star-studded cast, so I don't think it was necessarily needed, as well as the fact that you have guys like Barwin and guys like Carter, although I guess he was sick, apparently, like you said. I'm still okay there for that side of the house.
Yeah, and if you look at really this, Cam Robinson, the Jaguars offensive tackle, they took him in the beginning of the third round, the 2017 NFL draft. He had a lot of help last year from what I saw when I rewatched some of their games. He had a lot of help from tight ends, from backs. He might get that again versus the Giants, but the point is, when he was one-on-one, I was not overly impressed. And in practice after Vernon's high ankle sprain, it was actually Lorenzo Carter and Romeo Okwara who they turned to getting those first-team reps. On base downs, it was Okwara. On the passing downs, it was Carter. And I actually think they're just going to seamlessly transition whatever snaps they gave to Okwara, since he's now recently been released, and give them to Connor Barwin, who's now full go, fully healthy. I actually spoke with him on the phone last week about another project he's doing in the Philadelphia community. He's going to eventually take to the Giants community. This is a guy who does a lot of good work in the community outside of football. And he told me he's a full go. He really improved and benefited from all the time off that Pat Shurmur gave him during training camp. And that was really the smart play. Shurmur's really, really cautious. We've learned this about injuries. With a veteran like Barwin, you just don't need to rush him back on the field. So I think I'm with you, Nick, against Cam Robinson. And then on the flip side, if they line up on the other side against Parnell, I think they can really have the advantage even without Vernon there. In other news, on the other side of the thing, Jaguars don't have many injuries to really talk about. But Austin Seferian-Jenkins, who missed practice all week, is actually returned to practice on Thursday. Is this someone the Giants have to be worried about when you consider, A, the Giants struggled all season in 2017 and dating further back to defend tight ends, and then B, they continued those struggles in the preseason against the Browns. So is this something you're worried about with Austin Seferian-Jenkins? To me, ASJ has been more name than game since he entered the NFL, so I'm personally not very worried about it. And if you look at it, Blake Bortles has had a lot of tight ends come through that were supposed to be great with him. The guy, I'm forgetting his name, the kid who played the guy who broke out with Peyton Manning and then was never good. Julius Thomas, that's one. Mercedes Lewis never did anything in the passing game there. That may be more on Lewis. I don't know. Clay Harbor for a while, people thought he'd do something with Bortles. So I'm not worried about ASJ, even given the Giants' struggles at tight end. I think Ray Armstrong will play a big role. What do you think about that, Nick?
It's interesting. He's a guy, he's 6'5", he's 262. I think we have to mention that because, to be totally frank, I didn't remember that until I watched.
Yeah.
And that's sad because I did watch a bit of Jets tape from last year, so I should have had a familiarity, but I didn't until I turned the tape back on. I was like, oh, this is that guy. Solid hands, but he wins with size. He moves pretty well within that, but he's more of a lumbering tight end. And why I'm pointing this out is the tight ends that Ogletree had trouble with, just specifically to hit the issue right on the head, were guys that were elusive speed guys that were a little bit smaller, a little bit quicker, a little bit more fluid in their breaks. That's not Jenkins. Jenkins has solid play strength. Like I said, he's got solid hands. But where he really flashes, and to be frank, the only place he flashes is in the red zone. On fades, and other routes, he really shows his athleticism there, can high point balls there. So I think, for anything, it's almost a direct replacement to Mercedes Lewis's ability down in the red zone. And with him being gone now. And so I think that, that's where the Giants have to worry. But in the end, they would have had to worry about him there anyway. The Jets moved him out as lone X receiver on a few plays in the red zone last year. So it could be a corner dealing with him. It could be Ogletree, again, a threat, but not something like the other tight ends in this league where you're going to have real worries, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Nick. Again, you're right. He did make an impact in the red zone, but that's really the only place where he so far made an impact in the NFL. And to me, it hasn't been very consistent either. So let's dive a little more into the matchup. That's really all the news. There's not much news. I mean, it's week one, not many injuries on either side of the ball. But as we dive a little more into the matchup, on paper, it certainly looks like it's going to be a difficult one for the Giants offense. I mean, the Jaguars ranked second in the NFL last season in points allowed, 16.8 per game. In total defense, 286.1 yards allowed per game. That's it. And in sacks, with 55 sacks, the second most in the NFL last year. And that's something Mike Shula talked about today, Giants offensive coordinator. And I think the best way, there's going to be ways for them to slow down this pass rush. Nick, do you want to dive into, can the Giants slow down this pass rush? How can they do it? What are your thoughts on that based on what you've seen?
Yeah, sure. So a few ways right off the bat. I threw this out on Twitter, I think in the middle of the last game, the week 3 preseason game. If guys saw it there. So just again, I'm repeating myself, but I think the big part is play action, and play action is not just a play to suck in the second tier linebackers and then throw over the top of their heads. The play action allows the offense to set as if they were running. So they were running the ball. So they run at the defensive lineman and basically jump set them and engage that way. And that really kind of shakes up how the defensive line fires off the ball and how they continue what they read. So that's one way to slow them down immediately without, even if the play itself is not successful, those varied looks are going to slow down the pass rush. The other side of this that is very interesting is I think the Giants, if you want to do a little bit of self-scouting, are very susceptible, almost like the Eagles were at the beginning part of last year, very susceptible to interior stunts. And this is not a team that does that often. Most of overall, the Jaguars are kind of a line them up, let them go, and let them fly downhill type of defense in the Gus Bradley kind of Gus Bradley, that in that tradition. So if they stunted more and kind of came and shot gaps a little bit more to the inside in those types of line games, I'd be a little bit more worried. It's definitely going to be an issue and something to focus on, but I don't think it's going to be a showstopper, to be fair.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Nick, because obviously Bradley's not there anymore, but the new defensive scheme didn't really change much from where he left off. And when you have that kind of talent on the defense side of the ball the Jaguars have, you can do what you just said. You can line them up and you could play very straightforward defense, but also, like you said, and this is something Shula actually pointed out, Giants offensive coordinator again today, he said that's the type of defense they are. They're really aggressive and they rally to the football. So because of that, there's definitely ways to combat that. And that's kind of what we were talking about throughout the offseason, what I was talking about even earlier before we started this podcast. Even if the play action passing game isn't actually working that well, it's still just changing schematically and just from a overall standpoint, what the defense can do and what they can throw at you. So I'm with you. I'm excited to see the Giants come out, in those heavy personnel packages on early downs and really get the Jaguars guessing. That's going to be the best way, in my opinion, they can beat a defense that's this elite. It's getting the defense guessing and getting them away from just pinning their ears back. And that's a really, really, really interesting point I thought you brought up about the defensive stunts on the defensive line. Because if you look back throughout the 2017 season, it's really funny to me because it's unbelievable that, there was no improvement in this area, but the Giants offensive line was really bad against defensive line stunts. Like it's literally what the Cowboys did twice in a row against them. Somehow they were able to bring it back late in the season and have it work again. The first game against the Cowboys last year was literally completely derailed by the defensive line stunts. The Cowboys rushed forward. They don't even have that many dynamic pass rushers on their line outside of DeMarcus Lawrence, and yet they were able to get consistent pressure. Obviously, part of that was, and I charted this game, McAdoo only used more than 5 blockers, I think, on 5 total snaps that whole game, which was embarrassing and to say the least with that offensive line. And after making no adjustment to how the offensive line was playing these defensive line stunts. But, if the Jaguars are going to line up and play the Giants straight up, and I do believe you're right on that, Nick, I think it's going to work to their advantage because, like you said, they have struggled, especially on that right side, with defensive line stunts. And when I was diving into a little more of this Jaguars team from the 2017 season, what they did well, the few things they did poorly, I was trying to look for weaknesses. And one area they were a little bit weak in, at least according to Pro Football Focus, was they had the 12th worst team in 2017 in overall special teams. And, I really like the Giants' addition of Thomas McGahee, the special teams coordinator, who actually revealed today he's dealing with a form of cancer. But he's getting treatments and he plans to continue working. And according to Football Outsiders, the Carolina Panthers are the 7th best special teams unit overall in 2017. So we're going 7th best, basically, in my opinion, versus the 12th worst. And they didn't have Gettleman there, as their general manager. And as we've seen this offseason, Gettleman's focus on the back end of the Giants roster has been special teams, special teams, special teams, special teams. He just recently signed Nate Stupar, the linebacker, who's basically, to me, like, more of a special teams ace. Nick, what have you seen from Stupar? And do you think he can come in right away and help the special teams out?
Yeah, I definitely think he can. And like you said, that's the theme from Gettleman is most of his signings are guys that can at least play. And this is Stupar is really a career special teamer, 6'2", 240 pounds. So what's really kind of funny about him is he was born in State College, Pennsylvania, and he went to Penn State. There is no one who's more linebacker you than this guy. So when you actually watch him, I'm not going to say the limited tape. It almost sounds like I'm putting him down. He was a career good special teams player. He's played since 12, so he survives for good reason. But the last recent tape was really from 16. He tore his ACL last year, so that's why he didn't have too many games last year. But he plays with active hands. He plays downhill, but he's that old school linebacker. He's 6'2", like I said, 240. Loves to get downhill. Not super agile. Kind of a little bit of a throwback. His uncle is Jeff Hostetler. Have to mention that fact. His brother played in the NFL. He's a good NFL athlete. To me, I like the signing as well because it is a little bit of a backup to BJ Goodson.
Right.
And I'm not saying Goodson has injury issues, but you don't want to have a thing where your main tackling linebacker is all you have in terms of depth. I think behind him before this, it was kind of iffy. And so, Stupar did challenge or was kind of, in 16, he really played a lot of snaps as the third linebacker for the Saints. Again, in their base package. Teams don't play base packages that often because of how many offenses play 11 personnel. So he played when he could, and he played well when he could in 2016. A lot of the guys in Saints land in terms of Twitter and the blogosphere really liked him as a guy and as a player. So, I think good signing overall and definitely an impact right away.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point there, Nick, because listen, you didn't want to say it, but you can say it. BJ Goodson has been injured since he entered the NFL with the New York Giants. He was injured all last season. It derailed what was a really good start in week one, where he had 14 tackles, 10 solo against the Cowboys, and really was active all over the field. And if he's your number one run stopper and you have guys like Ray Armstrong and Alec Ogletree who really aren't built to take on, to be that inside run plugger in that stacked linebacker position. You talk about left inside linebacker. You need a guy for depth there, and Stupar can be that guy. And before it was Calvin Munson, who was kind of, hanging around the roster for a while. But what I really like about this decision was, Stupar may just offer more in the run game than Munson, but more importantly, he's also offering special teams help, which is something that I think a lot of people are questioning some of the Giants' moves this offseason, especially when they put in 6 waiver claims and now have really upped that to 8 different moves from the initial 53-man roster released on Saturday to where it is now, 8 new changes. But I just think it's really following a plan, which is to use those back end roster spots on guys who can help you win now in special teams, rather than guys like Gerald Adams, who have this raw upside that Jerry Reese, the old general manager, tended to fall in love with. But at the same time, when you're hanging on to these guys with athletic upside and projecting where they might be, you're losing out on that specific season. Guys who can really help you right now, guys like Stupar, So I love the move personally. It's such a small move to be one that you love, but to me, it just goes with the overall theme that I really like. And you brought up a great point there. I mean, you need some depth behind Goodson. Besides the special teams, there was one other area I felt was a weakness with this 2017 Jaguars roster. And let's not, crown them the kings, but because a lot of the reason they were really good last year, in my opinion, was they were unbelievably lucky from an injury standpoint. They had, in their entire defense, they had only 2 games lost by starters to injury. And it was a concussion to Talvin Smith that cost them 2 games. That was it. So, I mean, that's incredible amount of injury luck. But anyway, moving on from that, their other weakness I found was the Jaguars' run blocking and their running game overall. According to Pro Football Focus, they were in the middle of the pack as far as run blocking goes overall. Leonard Fournette averages 3.9 yards per carry, despite the fact that the Jaguars, more than any team in the NFL, had an advantage when it comes to blockers versus defenders in the box, which just goes to show they're going to use a lot of heavy personnel as well against the Giants. What did you see as far as the biggest weakness on the run blocking from the run blocking and offensive line in general, and how the Giants can exploit it?
Yeah, sure. And you brought up a good point, just real quick to slide in the stats too on their tendencies. They're an offense, Nathaniel Hackett, their offensive coordinator, who basically featured 2 tight end sets for about 40% of snaps last year, which is pretty high. They were second highest in 12 personnel, and they were third highest in 13 or second highest as well in 13 personnel. So they're going to throw out those heavier sets. And they like to mix in a fair amount of inside zone, outside zone, mid zone, and power. Their power, it's mostly power in their gap scheme, not much else besides that. But it was basically Patrick Omameh pulling in power, who's now a Giant, and AJ Cann, who is their other right guard, who is basically there now, and he's kind of their weakest link on their line. And he's a pretty solid run blocker, though. I actually had to break him down with well over 5 games for the scouting academy this summer. So took a real good look at him and where his kind of positive weaknesses are. His weaknesses show up more in pass pro. We can get to that later. But in terms of run blocking, the only thing I would say why that YPC dips a little bit for Fournette is because I think within the mix that I said they played, when you watch their tape, I think they become a little predictable. And they become a little stubborn to running 22 personnel against an 8-man box with those 8 guys filling those holes within that gap discipline. They stonewall themselves a little bit, and I don't think that's not really indicative of how Blake Bortles played. I think he played really well down the playoff stretch and probably a little weaker before that going into the playoffs. So I think part of it's that and just a predictable offense, but an offense that is very, very dynamic and one that when it gets going, it's pretty streaky. You kind of have to watch out, and we can dive into that more. But specifically for the run blocking, I definitely think, their weakness, I would say, even with Andrew Norwell as the new guard that they brought on now to play left guard, I think still in their gap scheme, I don't think it's as good as it could be. And I think overall the Giants are going to win this battle.
Yeah, I really think you're right on that, Nick. And I think it's going to be key to this game. They have to stop the run because Jaguars offense is a lot like, I mean, not like the Giants offense, but they have similar ideas in mind. They want to establish the run. They want to win off the play action passing game. If you can take away the run game with Leonard Fournette, you're really going to put them in a bind. And if you look at it, there's one other aspect of this offense that I noticed from watching them, from rewatching them, and it's something actually that James Betcher talked about today, something that the Giants defense is going to have to be ready for all game. And that's the quick screens. They run a lot of screen passes. Corey Grant is somebody you should keep an eye on, Jaguars running back. I'm hoping the Jaguars don't play him a lot. In my opinion, they played him far too few snaps in 2017. Grant was a really, really big impact player on that offense, but he barely got in the game. How do you think that's going to be an issue for the Giants stopping these screen passes against the Jaguars?
Interestingly, I haven't thought about that one yet specifically, just because I was thinking about their RPO game. I think the RPO game is the bigger issue, but to answer the screen question, not necessarily, because the recognition from both Goodson and Ogletree at the second level, that's really their strength in both players' regards, in man or zone. And I would even go as far as to say along the defensive line. I think maybe to Lorenzo Carter's side, maybe that would be just
Right.
he's a rookie and he doesn't see that recognition is not going to be there in his first game. You kind of have to say that. So I think the screen game is not as much to worry about specifically. And again, because how well Ogletree moves sideline to sideline. I mean, look, Giants Twitters love to just jump on this guy, but the bottom line is he moves sideline to sideline as well as anyone else in the league, and he really bailed out his partner Mark Barron on a lot of run plays last year,
Right.
where he's very good at that type of coverage, and Goodson is very good there too. I do think, though, just to bring it up, the RPO side of things is something that Nathaniel Hackett loves to run, and he loves to run it from outside zone, pairing it with bubble and tight end seam throws. Those, I think, are going to be the ones, or not even tight end seam, I should say slot type of seam throws, slot slant throws. Those would be the ones that I would kind of worry about more than the screen, just because they pick on a part of the Giants lineup that, again, at the linebacker side is not bad, but it's going to make the Giants be disciplined. It's going to make them have to tackle very solidly in space. It's going to have to make them choose between two different evils for the RPO, and whether to kind of pressure the run or move towards the pass. And I think they're ultimately going to try to isolate it so they run the ball off those outside zones. But that's actually something that Jacksonville did very, very well against the New England defense in the championship game.
And that's interesting you bring that up because I think if I really have to think about it, I am less worried about these quick screens out to the outside because, like you said, Ogletree moves well side to side. And in addition to that, you also have the advantage of Landon Collins, who moves really well downhill. But at the same time, I'm definitely worried about what you just brought up because I'm keying on Keelan Cole, who's the former undrafted rookie free agent for the Jaguars, signed last year. And when you go back and watch him in depth, he is a really, really, really good route runner for where he's at in his career. And I think he's going to get better and better and better. I think he's going to be their number one this year. And they line him up in the slot a lot, or at least they did last year in 2017. Obviously, the injury to Marquise Lee may change that, but I don't think so. So you put him up against B.W. Webb, and that to me is a matchup they can exploit, especially like you said, if they're also putting him in situations where he might be matched up against the linebacker in the slot. So that's something I'm definitely keeping an eye on. Do you think that, Cole's going to be a rough matchup for the Giants? Have you looked at Cole at all?
I have not specifically, but that description, yeah, again, as people may tell, a lot of this, what we do with Dan and I is very free flow. We have not talked about this. And yeah, I would say that's something that, for me at this stage in the Giants secondary too, yeah, that's going to be a tougher one. If we're talking about week 7, week 8, and this is more of a gelled unit that's used to doing a lot of things, it probably has a little more effective pressure. I think that may not be as big a threat, but now, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, look at it. Like, here's the way I'm looking at it. Leonard Fournette should be my number one worry, but he's not. I mean, the Giants' run defense was dominant this preseason, and the Giants' run defense, the Cardinals' run defense in James Betcher's scheme for 3 straight years was dominant, and it's a lot based on the scheme. We've talked about this before. There's a lot of run blitzes, and there's a lot of talent on this defensive line, especially when it comes to run stopping. Damon Harrison, Dalvin Thompson, they're two of the best run stoppers in the NFL. They really are. Damon Harrison is the best, and Dalvin Thompson's getting there. So you had BJ Hill. We've already talked about that standpoint. So I'm not as worried about that. My two guys I'm keying on, honestly, are Keelan Cole and Corey Grant. We're gonna have to see how that goes. But let's flip this a little bit to the other side of the ball real quick. Nick, how do you see the Giants getting Odell Beckham Jr. and Saquon Barkley involved from a schematic standpoint to attack this Jaguars defense?
Interesting kind of way to think of it. I wrote a piece for Cover One this past week, and I did a little digging for the piece. And if you look at the recent teams that have played the Jaguars and have success, you go back to Week 16 against San Francisco, and then in the AFC Championship game where the Patriots basically came back in the last quarter. But both of those two teams are two of the top teams that run 21 personnel, and that's 2 running backs, 1 tight end. And so what Dan picked up on this in the preseason. The Giants are running a little bit more 21 personnel than kind of I thought they would, and a lot of people thought they would. And then if you look, they kept Shane Smith as a fullback and only kept 3 tight ends, and in terms of their roster moves. And that to me is a little bit of a tip. Not that they're not going to play 12 personnel a lot, but that's a tip to me that hey, like they seemingly think that that their FB1 is a higher value than tight end 4, which is, not a lot of teams are thinking that way these days.
Yep.
And so how to get those 2 players open, I think it's going to start off with a lot of 21 personnel early in the game. I think in the script, it's going to be there early. The Patriots saw in the AFC Championship game, the first 4 plays were out of 21 personnel. What's really interesting though, is you go back to San Francisco game and Jimmy Garoppolo was 10 of 11 for 126 yards, I believe, in that game. His yards per completion were like above 12. His yards per completion for the whole game were somewhere around 7 as an average. So they really did some damage there. Nothing crazy schematically from the play action. A lot of fullback leaking into the flat, a little bit of over route running, a little bit of digs off of the play action. Simple stuff. I don't think this has to be a game where Mike Shula, who's going to really be the guy designing the more complex plays here. I don't think it's going to be a game where they flash a lot of that at all, especially being week 1. I think this is one where Pat Shurmur, it's his opening first game as a head coach for the New York Giants. I think he's going to want to stick with what he does best, and that's play calling within the structure of the game. It's not designing new plays. So I think it's going to be basic stuff to, again, more than what we saw in the preseason for sure in the passing game, but a lot more kind of stuff to keep the chains moving. And Brent Coleman did a really nice preview video on YouTube. But one of the biggest things that he highlights, kind of the most important thing, is that 3rd and long is what you have to stay out of.
Yes.
If you're facing off against this Jaguar team. This wasn't just Coleman looking at basic statistics. DVOA at Football Outsiders, 3rd and long. These guys were ranked number 1 by like a long shot. It was a negative 85.1% DVOA. Those people that follow DVOA, like that number doesn't even make any sense. I would think that would be like an aberration, because the next closest ranking I think was like negative 25% DVOA for the next team. So you cannot really, you don't want to rely on being in 3rd and long. So I do believe it's going to be play action passes. What was interesting is, and again, to kind of really dive into it, what teams like the Patriots and the Steelers did was attack the flats very aggressively.
Yes.
Cover 3 and cover 4 areas of the field. The only thing that I don't like about that for the Giants, if you want to say, hey, okay, that's great, run OBJ on a 5-yard out route and throw it to Bouye's side, their cornerback, who's not super twitchy. Let's do that. Let's challenge them at their strengths. That's not really Shurmur's style. That's more of like almost like a McAdoo type thing. And so what Shurmur's going to want to do, I think, is set up Eli to make not easier throws, but throws that are much more simple, that don't rely him to make a perfect execution every single play. So I'm actually looking for, like I said, shorter routes that are more in the middle of the field. And then I do think a little bit of an interesting kind of thing that no one's really talking about, or few people are talking about, is the Jaguars are a little susceptible to over routes. And what we mean by over routes are plays run from this, most likely from
we saw all preseason from the Giants, basically.
Well, and that's the thing,
that Jets game where they hit.
I didn't want to just refer to, hey, like, a bunch of Davis Webb's throws that he made. Great.
No, but what about the second game with, the 3rd preseason game with the Jets, when he hit all those? Are those not over routes that he hit consistently with Shepard and then the one to Ingram at the beginning of the game?
The one was, and I didn't check every one of those, and you're exactly right. Manning did make those throws, but I can only verify for sure off the top of my head that one was. And
are you talking about the Ingram play, the second of the game?
No, actually, I think it was a Shepard play. It was a Shepard play that was closer to the sideline, and so obviously, so there definitely could be more. Why this is so key against the cover three, mostly what the Jaguars play, cover three defense, is interestingly when they take a side of their field and they play it in man coverage, they a lot of times play sides, and what this means is basically that if the Giants come out in a 3-by-1 wide receiver set, and a lot of teams do this, the isolated X wide receiver, the Jaguars like to play boundary lock to that guy, and what that boundary lock basically means for cover three is it's basically man. So if you can envision though, if you play man on that one side of the field, the deep third is not there on that side of the field in zone because that deep third player is occupied in man. So what teams like to do is throw deep crossing type routes to that unoccupied third. The question is, how do the Jaguars account for it somehow? Or not somehow, but in a few different ways. The most predominant way they do, it's really interesting. They take their Mike linebacker and he reads the 2 and 3 wide receivers on that 3-by-1 wide receiver set, and he actually follows them where they go. So it's almost like a pattern match type cover, and he takes over that deep third position. Well, that's a huge advantage if you've got Sterling Shepard running that deep route against Telvin Smith. Smith is very, very fast, but it's almost impossible for these guys to take that coverage deep, to what's called carrying that wide receiver that far down the field. The key is it's kind of a knockout blow. It's not really a blow you can do often because it's going to require a 2.5 at least to really a 3 to 3.5 type seconds worth of pocket time for Eli Manning, which again is not normal.
Yeah.
That's not how you base your game plan off of. So just a little insight to what may be a knockout blow, that deep third area, the deep third area where the Jaguars are playing man.
Yeah, and they could get to that. I don't think they're gonna, feature that too often, like you said, because it puts them in a high pressure situation because it requires the offensive line to protect for a little bit longer. But what I do think they're going to be able to attack the Jaguars, based on what you just said as well, is with these underneath passes to Saquon Barkley. Just they may not even be designed routes to Barkley. It's just a product of, if the Jaguars are playing a lot of cover 3 and cover 4, like you said. Manning already said it earlier this offseason. He said it twice, actually. He said, the thing I'm most excited about for this new season is the fact that I have somebody to throw the ball to underneath, and a way to attack zone defense is something he didn't didn't feel like he had in the past. So that's actually what I'm going to be keeping an eye on. If what you're saying is true and they're going to play in a lot of these zone defenses, I think Barkley underneath is going to play a huge, huge role, even on these just dump downs where there's nothing open right away and Manny makes the quick decision to get the ball to him. It's a better option than it ever was. Barkley can do a lot of things after the catch and turn plays that may look like 1, 2, 3, 4 yard gains into first downs, and maybe into touchdowns if he gets the right angle. So I'm interested in seeing that. I'm also interested in seeing if what we saw during the preseason translates to the regular season. Will we see Evan Ingram line up as the lone bound receiver? And he's now been fully cleared from his concussion, so he's good to go. I think he'll play a full complement of snaps. He's not even on the injury report. Will he be the lone X? How will that affect it? Will they continue to use Odell Beckham Jr. in the slot? It's a good way to get him away from A.J. Bouye and Jalen Ramsey. Put him in the slot. Will they do that? I think they will in this specific matchup. Especially. What is there anything else you want to see on the offensive side of the ball, or you think we'll see?
I think that's kind of the right way to think of it. And I think even maybe some routes to the fullback Shane Smith,
right?
To those open flats. And if the Jaguars play man, I honestly, the Giants' strength is their position players. Everyone knows that. So I wouldn't I wouldn't be afraid of that if I were Shermer, especially with what he can do. If they're going to predominantly do that, which I don't think they will, but they might. I think what they're going to try to do is confuse Eli a lot with 2 deep pre-snap looks into one deep actual coverages.
Yeah,
meaning cover 1, cover 3, but from a wacky look initially, and get him to freeze a little bit. Whether that I think Eli knows that too. So it's kind of strength on strength there in terms of that. And so anyway, I think by the second half, this offense is going to be rolling.
Me too. I've said it before. I said it in my prediction, and we're going to get to that in a second because I'm going to make us do predictions every week and then look back at how poorly we predicted the score. But I said it earlier when I did my prediction for 24/7. I think this game is going to be a lot more high scoring than people think. I would bet the over if I was gambling on the game, on the over under. I think both these teams are going to hit some big plays off the play action pass. And I don't think the Giants, I think that Bortles is going to hit more big plays in the pass game than people realize against this Giants defense, because a lot of what they did, you talk about the deep over routes. That's something I saw a lot from the Jaguars offense last year as well. And I know you might have seen. Is that something you also saw when you look back at them?
Yeah, a little bit, a lot of more.
Especially down the end of the season with Keelan Cole, I thought.
Yeah, that and they like the simple deep post to deep
Yeah,
digs, that type of thing for sure.
right. Yeah. Anyway, just and that's kind of an area of the field where the Giants are still in test. They got Janoris Jenkins, but Eli Apple, I know you're a little higher on him than I am, Nick. I still need to see it. I'm losing some faith there, and I have absolutely no faith in what they have behind him. A bunch of guys they claimed on waivers and BW Webb. But yeah, that's something interesting we'll look for. But yeah, I think it's gonna be high scoring. We'll get to the predictions now. I actually think the Giants are going to win this game, and I think they're going to win this game with the key special teams play. I don't know if it's going to be a forced fumble on the return coverage. I don't know if it's going to be a big return from Kalen Clay. That's really, to me, is just a product of them blocking well. I wasn't a huge fan of of Sharp or Raymond in special teams or Kalen Clay. I don't know much about either. I think that really these returns come down to a lot of the blocking and the scheme from special teams coordinator Thomas McGay. But I think they have an advantage there, clear advantage of special teams. I think the Giants are going to win this game 27-23. They're going to smash the over of 40. I believe it's 43.5 right now. So they're going to beat that by 6.5 points for those gambling. And I think the Giants will win this game. Nick, give me a prediction, a final score, and then let's sign it off.
I would not look at the over-unders. I'm an old school kind of guy. Got to see that weather report. Got to verify that weather report before I chime in there. Not really a massive final score indicator here, but I would say this. Like I said, I think the second half adjustments are going to be the key to the game, and I do think the Giants are going to win. And I would look for something on the higher side of the game, but it may come from the second half. The win may come from the second half adjustment, where you may be cursing the Giants defense for the first part of the game, but then loving the Giants defense at the back end.
Put a score down, Nick. Put a score.
I think they can. I legitimately think they can put up 24 points, 27 points, like you're saying, 30 points on this team. I think it's going to be 24-27 to 17, something like that.
Okay. So you think they're going to win by more than a score? Very interesting. You have a lot more faith than I do in this Giants defense right now. I didn't like what I saw from the pass coverage in the preseason, but time will tell. I mean, it is Blake Bortles. I don't want to give him too much credit. I really don't. But at the same time, guys, thanks again for tuning in. And on a side note, I know there was some talk. I saw a comment in our reviews on iTunes, giving us a 2-star review, I believe, a 3-star review, based solely on the fact that you couldn't hear me very well and I need to improve my mic. Don't worry, guys, for the next show. We are fixing that situation. I will have a better mic rolling for the next show next week when we get a chance to break down the tape from this game and then preview the Cowboys game. That's the podcast I'm most excited for. Since me and Nick started this idea of having this podcast, that's basically the one I've had circled on my schedule. After week 1, previewing week 2 for a lot of reasons. One, we get to actually go based on what Pat Shurmur and James Bettcher show us in the regular season. 2, we get to preview the Dallas Cowboys. It's such a big game every year on this Giants schedule. The early season Cowboys game sets the tone for the season. So I do promise the sound will improve. Stick with us. And again, if you do like the show, please do us a favor and rate and review us and subscribe on iTunes. It's our best way so we can build this product and get it better and better and better. For me, that's it. Nick, do you want to sign off and say anything?
No, I'm kind of psyched, like you said, psyched to get going. All my work will be on TManic21 on Twitter.
Yep.
I will try to grind up as many plays as I can in game. I was doing about 4 or 5 for kind of like quick breakdowns as they happen, but a little bit more than maybe the commentators will give. So we'll definitely get those, and we'll kind of fire up a YouTube channel aggregating all that after the game for maybe guys that don't miss the game and want to see the highlights in a little different way. So we'll get that all going and have that in the show notes, and we're good to go.
Yeah, and you can find me, guys, on Twitter as well. Dan Schneier, NFL, DANSCHNEIER, NFL. And just with what Nick just said, excuse me. Sorry, guys. Just with what Nick just said, if you weren't following his Twitter during the preseason, he's breaking down 3 to 5 plays, sometimes more, during these preseason games. And they were awesome. Like I was watching him during the game, found myself losing focus in some of the Davis Webb snaps just because I was watching these breakdowns over and over. So take a look at those. Follow us on Twitter. And on that note, we're out for this week. Go Giants. Let's get to 1-0.